What up, what up, what up? Welcome to What the Trans!
What the trans?
What the Trans indeed! Ashley, what's going on in your world?
It's good, yeah. So it turns out I'm on a podcast with someone who says what up. So that's new. That's pretty cool. Yeah, how about you?
That may be the first and last time you're on a podcast with someone saying what up. I'm trying different things.
Okay, I mean...
I tweeted out the other day a call for people to leave reviews on iTunes, and I called our listeners. I called our news the Watters.
Yes.
I don't know if that's going to be a thing. Are we going to have a clan of Watters following us around now?
I mean, we're not married to that name, are we? So how is your?
I'm not very good at naming things. I mean, as you could tell by some of the segment intros, that's not really something I'm gifted at.
Yeah, well, I mean,
But yeah, I'm currently sat in my old childhood bedroom up in Yorkshire.
Up in Yorkshire.
Yeah, you can't tell from my accent, but I do hail from North Yorkshire, so I'm just sat on my bedroom floor. I'm using 2 bins as my sort of recording desk, and my wall is covered in Newcastle United things because, you know, you do some odd things when you're a trans kid in the closet, don't you?
You certainly do.
Yeah, it's just such a weird thing.
And
now I'm sat here creating the UK's only trans news podcast.
Are we?
How far have I come?
Yes, absolutely. Is that what we are? That surprises me. I assumed that there had been some gobby Brits before us.
Well, there's plenty of LGBT news shows, but we're the only one that I found that is exclusively about trans news.
Huh. Okay. I mean, let's look into that. Anyway, so let's get on with our podcast, the leading podcast of its type, as I now discover. So yes, I guess we should probably start off with the news, shouldn't we?
Yeah, and let's have some terrible news, because it is.
A lot of it is terrible news. This week, of course, and firstly, America. The Trumpian fiefdom has been coiling its tentacles further around the lives of trans people this week, with several different parts of the government now indicating considerable hostility to trans rights. Not least of which is the Department of Justice, who seem to have forgotten their remit somewhat, as they've recently told the Supreme Court that they don't consider anti-trans discrimination in the workplace a violation of federal law. So this statement was made by Solicitor General Noel Francisco, who asked the Supreme Court to consider a case from March 2018. So in that decision, judges ruled in favour of a trans employee who'd been dismissed from a Michigan funeral home after beginning to transition. The argument hinged at that time on the use of the word sex in the existing anti-discrimination law, and the court found that this does indeed cover trans people on the basis that trans people experience discrimination as a result of what others perceive their sex or gender to be. Francisco wants the Supreme Court to reassess whether the Court of Appeals erred in concluding the petitioner discriminated against the employee because of the employee's sex, by applying its sex-specific dress code based on the employee's biological sex rather than the employee's gender identity, and also to reassess whether gender discrimination is the same as sex discrimination. So, that's a bit of a long and complicated thing.
As I understand it, this is all down to a thing called Title IX, yeah?
Correct.
They brought that in to help women have equal access to sports teams at colleges, and it's sort of become a catch-all for civil rights as well as a bit of the Eighth Amendment and a bit of the civil rights thing, and just whereas here we've got the Equality Act and we've got the GRA, the Gender Recognition Act, and that kind of covers us. Whereas in America, they've got 5 or 6 things that sort of do the same thing as all that, but really muddily.
Yes, and depending on which state you're in, there's different levels of enforcement, and each state has their own particular blah blah blah. It's actually supremely complicated, I think, even for the people that live there. But essentially, the Trump administration has asked for this case to be looked into once again because they don't believe that Title IX protections should be applied to trans people, as we mentioned last week. So this comes on the heels of that memo that the New York Times got a hold of, which suggests that the Trump admin wants to define gender as something that is assigned at birth and completely immutable. So obviously that's bad, but seems to be kind of part of that strategy, essentially trying to limit the rights of trans people to actually exist and to be able to be protected in the workplace. The upshot of this, of course, as far as the Francisco asking the Supreme Court to do his bidding, is that they want to be able to say trans people aren't covered by anti-discrimination legislation, therefore people can discriminate against trans people with impunity on whatever grounds they like. Of course, it's going to be heavily defended if it's a religious freedom argument, as it so often is. But there's not a lot of room for hope in a lot of the news this week, but it is there because there are the failure modes for this particular plot. There are a lot of them. Essentially, this has to get through quite a lot of paperwork and court hearings before it becomes any sort of law. And not everybody is actually on board with helping the Trump administration do these things. There are people in the legal system in the US who have spoken out against it already. In fact, there's been a considerable backlash to that entire memo, which we covered 2 weeks ago, but we'll come on to that in a minute. But the point is, this is kind of scary, but it's not the law of the land yet, and it's got a lot of hurdles to cross before it becomes that. So that in itself is a cause for hope. There's room in there for, the truth to be got out, and campaigning, which is kind of, has already started really in the US.
Saying that, there has still been a lot of fear that I've seen, like on Twitter and stuff. Like a lot of American trans people are sharing things like, if you've got one grandparent from Canada or Ireland, you can get out. And that isn't like the whole thing where it's like, oh my God, the Republicans have won, I'm moving to Canada. It's like, I think I got to go to Canada now because,
can't stay here.
This could result in my death, maybe. Like, if this is, because that's sort of where this kind of thing ends, right? Like,
Yeah. I've seen a lot of US trans people actually sharing advice for, listen, yeah, fine, they're not coming for us right this second with guns, but maybe pack a bag and keep it handy for if you have to escape in a hurry. And it's really, really dispiriting and terrifying that that's kind of useful advice now.
Yeah, and it's just so dark and cynical that the reason, I'm convinced the reason this is happening at all is because of the election that's tomorrow as we record and will have just wrapped up as this
goes out.
Podcast drops. Yeah, like, this is, it's like there's a whole base of Trump supporters that hate Muslims and hate trans people.
And not just those two people, honestly. It's like they tend to have a bit of a...
Well, there is a list, but...
Oh, yes.
Like, those are two of the things that the Trump administration uses to fire up their base and be like, look, you got the Mexican caravan,
oh, God.
Well, the Guatemalan and, South American caravan that's coming through Mexico, you got trans people coming into your bathroom, you got Muslims coming over here to kill us. Vote for Republicans. It's just so grim.
Moving on, but in the same sort of field, obviously. Also this bi-week, United States officials at the United Nations have been seeking to eliminate the word gender from United Nations human rights documents.
Ugh.
I know, right? In recent meetings of the UN's Third Committee, which is concerned with social, humanitarian and cultural rights, US officials have been pushing for the rewriting of General Assembly policy statements to remove what the administration argues is vague and politically correct language, reflecting what it sees as an ideology of treating gender as an individual choice rather than an unchangeable biological fact.
Gender and sex aren't the same thing,
Yes, let's... well, the interesting thing is... There are several interesting things about this, none of it's surprising particularly, but the officials who've been involved in these changes particularly are actually understood to have been sent from Washington and were not full-time diplomats on the UN mission. So the word gender is used on the documents for the UN in part to be inclusive of trans people, but these US officials have been lobbying for the term violence against women to be used in place of gender-based violence. One European diplomat said that we are seeing this more and more coming up on the Third Committee, and this is going to be a battle in the coming weeks, but Again, with the sort of spark of hope here is he also noted that the United States policy on the word gender is not entirely consistent. As we've said, on a number of recent occasions, US officials have called for the removal of the word gender. At least once, the same word has been added into a text as a result of insistence from the United States mission. So this European diplomat did speculate that this inconsistency might reflect a tussle between different members of the US mission's members. So again, it seems like they're trying to push something through, these part-timers from Washington who are the cat's paw of the Trump admin, and who are not having it all their own way in the department, actually at the UN mission, with these diplomats who are refusing to go along with this newly reactionary way of talking about these things. So, yeah, what do you think of this?
Well, I mean, it's good to hear that there are people, like, batting for American trans people, and, you know, I guess this would have massive repercussions for trans people across the world, because America's a big player, but, like, when I first came out, right, in 2012, Joe Biden that year said that civil rights is, trans rights is the civil rights issue of our time.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, this is like the biggest person on the planet who ever even mentioned trans stuff. Like, I never heard about it really ever. And now that the American diplomats are fighting with each other at the UN, it's just so, like, there's part of me that thinks, like, were cis people ready for us?
Well, I mean, in that sense, I don't really care, because I am, I'm well beyond the point of waiting for them to be. It's like, okay, you know what? You guys keep murdering us. Can you stop that, please?
Yeah, have you seen Boys Don't Cry? Yeah, don't do that. Stop doing that.
Yeah, stop doing that, guys. But hearing about this kind of conflict within the UN mission, seemingly, that's there, it's kind of farcical, isn't it? You can just imagine things behind the scenes of like, okay, we want you to change this. Well, no, we're not going to do that because of, and it just seems like so inconsistent as to be, well, they're probably going to be hurting their own credibility there in the Third Committee at the UN by pushing this kind of, our view and our view only way of dealing with everything. But then that's the US in a nutshell, I suppose. Anyway.
Do you know how much Trump has influence over, like, the UN diplomats? Like, how far in the administration do these people go? Are they sort of, like, independent? Like, I guess civil servants here, or...
I mean, I think there's a perception that the diplomatic corps of most countries that it should be, and it's just kind of guided by the foreign policy. I don't know to what extent Trump himself is going to have been the one calling the shots here. I think it's much more likely to have been somebody like Mike Pence, who is kind of being driven by a very narrow religious ideology. And I think Trump's just kind of going along with what everyone else tells him, essentially. I really do think he's kind of like the idiot king. And all these kind of extremely right-wing elements who've been waiting for a chance now have that chance because the leader is not speaking out against them and, in fact, tacitly supports them. So I don't know to what extent he himself's going to have strategized this. That's a question for the Foreign Office. But we, as a pokey little trans bitching podcast, are probably not going to get very much information out of the US State Department.
Yeah, and it's pretty much well above our pay grade. As like we get paid nothing.
Yeah,
and like our Roadhouse is complaining about stickers, and now we're talking about like what the American State Department and diplomatic corps are all about.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy.
One of the many reasons why Trump is scum, to make us talk about these things that are, globally important, rather than just some asshole with 700 quid wanting to put up a billboard.
Yeah, thanks for that. But okay, so the human cost of this, right? This stuff is stressful. We mentioned minority stress last time. Evidently, a lot of trans people in the US are fearful and struggling, as news has emerged quite recently that calls to the Trans Lifeline have actually surged to 4 times the usual number in the wake of the memo we covered last week, where the Trumpkins plan to strictly define gender as male or female and unchangeable. So they also reported that the same day they received twice the usual number of first-time callers to the service. So that's...
I wonder if those things are related.
I suspect they are. But also related, of course, is the backlash to all of these moves, right? The Trump administration has announced it's going to do this, it's going to do that, but as we can see already, they don't have it all their own way yet. And in the wake of all of these announcements, there have been a lot of high-profile protests. So just in the last 2 weeks, we've seen an open letter to Trump and Pence signed by 1,500 parents of trans youngsters who are blasting the Trump administration as bullies. A huge banner was unfurled at a World Series baseball game in Los Angeles in the familiar colours with "Trans people deserve to live" on it, which honestly, that's a really basic demand. Activists also...
It's not like we're asking for much.
No.
Like, there's a lot of people out there that think we're asking for special rights, but that basically sort of underlines our entire ethos.
Yeah, we just want to kind of live. But also, again with flags, a couple more flags. So activists also have unfurled a massive trans pride flag on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. And
That's a big flag.
It's huge, yeah. The pictures of it was absolutely like 150 odd feet across or something. There was also a trans advocate interrupting Jeff Sessions during a speech while also waving a trans pride flag. Even Caitlyn fucking Jenner finally came out and said that she'd been wrong to support the administration, and she sort of apologised for having done so. But a lot of people didn't take that super seriously because we'd spent literally years trying to tell her the thing that she's only now realised. So welcome to the programme, Caitlyn, but you'll have to forgive us if we have a couple of trust issues for a little while.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to be all like, oh, she's our hero, but then she has, like, the last few days donated, like, close to $1 million to various trans-related charities and stuff. So,
well, it's
hell, even if she's just trying to buy, like, better PR and stuff, like, the end result is still a bunch of charities at a time like this have a lot more money that they could use. So,
well,
keep guilt spending, Caitlyn. Keep guilt spending.
Yeah, all right.
Maybe we'll invite you to our parties. If you keep doing it enough.
Okay, let's just roll that one back, Michelle, darling. I am not having a party. And finally, just in the backlash to this, the international science journal Nature also condemned the United States government's recent actions and rhetoric as having no basis in science. So it's providing an extremely well-sourced article, as you might imagine, showing that gender is quite a lot more complicated than religious fundamentalists who are temporarily on the levers of power make it out to be. Yes, there's a lot of terrifying stuff coming out of the US, and not just related to trans rights, but there is a reaction against it. There are people speaking out against it, and the science, the evidence is the thing that is on the right side of history, unlike this lot.
And America has, like, a booming Antifa, anti-fascist movement and stuff, like, and they don't have, like, the turf problem that we do here. Like, they have TERFs there, obviously, and they are in the movement, but overwhelmingly, the left in America is behind trans rights. Like, overwhelmingly so. Some might say more so than here, in a lot of ways. Like, your city dwellers, basically.
Yeah.
Rural areas, it's the exact opposite from what I've read. Like, there's been a certain few tweets where it's just like, oh, if you're in, like, one of the square states in the middle... just don't go there.
I mean, I'm not sure it's... I don't know. I don't know enough about it. You hear all sorts of horror stories about America. It's a country of hundreds of millions of people. There's going to be some people who are absolutely tremendous and some who are just really horrible. So I'm sure there's the small town rural trans experience, which has been surprisingly, but it's a scary time. It must be a terrifying time for the trans people in the US, and so we shall see what carries on going. But you never know. Maybe this imminent midterm election that's due a couple of days from now, as we record this, we'll see some change, or maybe things will get worse, and we'll report on that too. So, but moving on. Not only did all of this take place just in the US over the last 2 weeks, but the results of the Brazilian general election have become known, showing that the far-right candidate Jair Bolsonaro, yes, Jair Bolsonaro, was the winner. Now, he has been referred to as the Trump of the tropics. Guilherme Casoares, a comparative politics professor at a university in Sao Paulo, told the Washington Post that 5 years ago he was just another congressman with anti-gay views. Now, Bolsonaro, like Trump, has become a larger-than-life figure. So he's also attracted no small amount of criticism in the past for his comments about women, the LGBT community, and racism. So particularly troubling is that he prefer his son to die in an accident rather than being gay, and also his open admiration for the military dictatorship which ruled Brazil from the 60s to the 1980s. So, another swing to the right.
Yeah, a huge one. Like the previous one, the previous government was sort of almost on the socialist end of things, like
Almost.
somewhere between liberalism and socialism, which are two completely different things, obviously. But they were very much a leftist party, and rising crime and rising instability in the country has, well, to quote a seminal literary text, "Turn to a man that they don't fully understand. You changed the game, Master Bruce." Like, it sounds like Brazil, as every year at like Trans Day of Remembrance, the vast majority of the names read out at these services are Brazilian. It's Brazilian trans women of colour. They are like, this is a country where that is the highest murder rates by far. And I don't see that changing anytime soon under this asshole. I think things are potentially for trans people going to get a lot worse there, and I wish there was a silver lining, but like we always want on this show to try and find some kind of positive in this, but this is genuinely terrifying. And and the news broke, like it was reported that in 20 universities, like military police came along and started raiding the libraries of like certain, like anything that's sort of critical of like the military dictatorship. Obviously leftist works were being taken out of there. And that was one of the most terrifying things I've read about this. It's like, this is probably where, like, Trump would go if he didn't have the oversight. And this is like day one. I think he's like the president-elect, right? He's not even like in the office yet. And it's already begun.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I'm pretty sure that story surfaced before the election, which is sort of troubling, isn't it, really? Since the writing was evidently on the wall. And this is just a reaction of people who've been failed by, or perceive that they've been failed by the government, which, because the government is leftist, it's like, oh, well, it's socialism's fault. And, in 10 years' time, in another country, it might be, oh, well, it's all the Conservatives' fault because, they've wrecked it. It's time for socialism. Although, obviously, we keep our fingers crossed that that's going to happen everywhere, and it just doesn't. So, So yeah, this was shocking, disheartening, and there are a few different resources and websites out there for ways of helping out the trans population of the US and for Brazil. And if you're able to assist in some small way, making donations or providing advocacy services, go and look, because I think the communities, the trans communities particularly, really, really could do with some support just now and solidarity.
Donating to the ACLU in America would be a good one, because once they start to properly roll back the protections, there's going to be a lot of court cases.
Yes.
A lot. And the ACLU will be able to, with the money that you give them, pick the ones where they have a fighting chance to win, and to set legal precedents, because this, unless the Democrats take the House and the Senate, or at least take one of them, this is going to be about the courts. And the ACLU, this is what they do. They take stuff to the Supreme Court, they take stuff to Supreme Courts in every state, and they set precedents and fight this stuff. This is how, gay sex was legalized in Texas because of the ACLU. They found this couple that got arrested in the privacy of their own home, and in 2002 they got the homophobic laws in Texas struck down. In 2002, which sounds too late. That's the kind of shit that should have happened 50 years before, but whatever, better late to the party than never.
Yes.
So yeah, ACLU, give them money.
Rock and roll. But I'm sure we'll carry on looking at this as it continues to rumble along, because that's what we do. But back to the UK now, and the story of a London gay sauna who has kicked out a gay trans guy for not having a penis. Yeah, so the trans guy has said, a staff member came over and requested I leave as I was not allowed because of my genitals. So when he's protested, he says the member of staff simply repeated it was a male space. The trans guy then showed the sauna employee his passport with his male gender marker and claims the member of staff repeatedly claimed that it was a male space. The staff member allegedly said that if he'd had tits and a dick, it'd be fine, but since he has a vagina, it's not. So, well done, London. This sort of thing just keeps coming up, doesn't it, despite it being in breach of the Equality Act. So, yes, London. Michelle O'Toole, London correspondent for What the Trans.
Well,
What's going on?
I don't really know. It feels like I have to defend the city, but I have, like, we're getting to a silly place if, like, you know, some gay guy wants to, you know, go to town on himself and others at a sauna, has to show their passport to do it. Like, that's where we are now?
Apparently, yeah, but it's just disappointing because there was that case a few weeks ago. There was that club, what is it, Triple XL or something, and it's for manly men who are manly and like to be manly with men. And so someone went along and I think they had like a corset top on and were told, well, you have to take that off if you're coming in here, and if I see you inside with it on, you'll be thrown out, sort of thing. And it's like, what on earth is wrong with you lot? You seem to be upholding some standards of something or other, which make no sense, actually, and, like, you know, doesn't make a man any less of a man. And, oh, for Christ's sake. So, yes, this is kind of super disappointing, but, no, there you go.
Yeah, from an LGBT venue, like, because,
Yeah.
you know, the gay saunas have a rich tradition. Like, you know, they came about because, you know, being gay, like, openly gay, just wasn't really an option, and trying to find guys in a hostile world before the internet was nigh on impossible. So you could go to the saunas and, you know,
Do the thing.
be openly gay and have sex and start relationships. That's what it was for. And, like, now it's more of a cultural thing of the gay scene in London. I'm not too sure. Is there, like, a sauna culture in Manchester?
There is, yeah, but obviously it's not something I've particularly investigated.
Yeah.
You know, not really my scene.
I can see how this would be very appealing to, like, gay trans guys. I can see that, because, you know, dating as a gay trans guy is pretty terrifying. I mean, dating as any trans person is terrifying, but yeah, like, especially with the trans guys, I can imagine.
I mean, apparently, the person who, in each of the articles I've read where this story's been covered, this guy's been given a pseudonym, so his real name hasn't been used, but a lot of the articles have called him Jason. So Jason actually looked up the policy of the gay sauna beforehand to see if it was trans-inclusive or trans-exclusive, but couldn't find anything on the website that hinted either way. There certainly wasn't anything specifically saying, hey, trans guys, sling your hook. So he just assumed that it was trans-inclusive and went along, only to discover that it wasn't. And it was apparently a humiliating experience for him, being escorted out of there for having the wrong genitalia. And it's like, don't do that. That's really nasty, policing somebody based just on that. Let them be in that gay male space. Because they are a gay male, despite what your reductive ideas about genitalia might say.
Yeah, let him go to town on people.
Right? And let other people
let him do his thing. Christ,
let the other people go to town on him as well. I mean, you know, all of these things are possible.
Yeah, I've known gay guy relationships with one of them as a trans guy. You know, like,
yeah, so have I. Several, actually.
It totally happens all the fucking time. I don't. Oh,
I
God.
know. Anyway, well, so before your blood pressure does that thing where your face pops open again, let's move on, because we are not going to throw all this annoyance and misery at you and then skip away humming. We're not David Cameron. So we have a couple of bits of slightly better news before we move on. So firstly, the Netherlands has issued its first ever gender-neutral passport. Woo! Leon Zegers, a 57-year-old from Breda, became the first person in the country to receive a passport with an X as their gender specification instead of M for the Dutch word for man, or V for the Dutch word for women, neither of which I can pronounce, and I don't want to embarrass myself by trying. So, Zegers was born intersex in 1961, but was classified as male on their birth certificate and raised in the male role. Now, they had gender confirmation surgery in 2001 to match their identity as female, but they now identify as gender fluid. So the move comes after Zegers won a lawsuit in which judges ruled that preventing their registration as gender neutral was a violation of private life, self-determination, and personal autonomy. So, Wonderful. Excellent. Good work.
Good for you, Leon.
Yeah.
I mean, this puts credence to the fact that the government are talking shit when they say, structurally, like infrastructure-wise, doing gender-neutral passports would be a nightmare, and also that there isn't a need. Even though every non-binary person I've ever met has said, yeah, we need this. We need this.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, it's not just going to be a benefit to the non-binary people. As mentioned, Zegas is themselves intersex. So, that's something, because there are so many issues surrounding the intersex community, the sort of, genital mutilations at birth, non-consensual, all that sort of thing, to try and fit with a doctor's perceived idea of one gender or the other. And it's really sickening, to be perfectly honest. But more widely, as you say, this absolutely would be of benefit to non-binary people. And there is literally no reason why this can't be done. So the Netherlands, adding themselves to the now growing list of countries who are offering gender-neutral options on passports or are about to. So it's not all bad. It isn't. And finally, for the news, and quite satisfyingly actually, in last week's show we mentioned the Guardian newspaper's recent editorial about trans rights, which was subtitled "Where Rights Collide," and called for a period of reflection before making any legislative changes, because trans people are icky and good middle-class white people shouldn't have to share a bathroom with them. It was awful. It was a rubbish editorial. It was incredibly disappointing. But thankfully, though, The Guardian also has staff in the United States who were almost unanimous in their criticism of this editorial, and have this week published a response to it, describing many of the editorial's talking points as unsubstantiated and accusing it of advancing transphobic viewpoints that are driving attacks on trans rights in America. Boom!
Well, this is like what I said before. The left in America seem to be more united in their defense of trans people and trans rights than here, by a long way. And you can see that sort of division between the American and the UK offices of The Guardian as proof of that. In so many places in America, in your cities on the coasts, Americans are down with trans people in a way that is not necessarily the case here. And in the Gender Pop Culture Disorder, I'll go into, there's been some news about trans representation in American television. And comparing that to British representation, it is miles ahead in so many ways. But yeah, this is good news, because, maybe, hopefully, the American Guardian will just be will basically shame the idiots in the UK Guardian into, doing the decent thing of retracting that thing.
Yes, and it is interesting to see that this has come out of the US. But these are some quite well-respected journalists whose names that I've heard before, who'd put their names on this kind of response to the editorial. And it was well-sourced. It was, an extremely credible set of arguments. And it's well, fantastic, brilliant. Why didn't they consider any of these things before writing the initial editorial? You fools. But it is interesting to see two parts of the same media organisation go after each other like that. It's just wow, okay, trouble in paradise.
Yeah, I used to know a couple of people that worked at The Guardian, and they've got offices all over, like Australia, some parts of Europe, they've got correspondents everywhere, in a way that a lot of British newspapers now don't. Because, they've had to cut back and stuff, but The Guardian is still keeping that going, and, the differences between them can be stark. They're all under the Guardian banner, but then the left tends to be more fractured than the right, and The Guardian is sort of famously a lefty paper. So you've probably got...
It started as it started as the Manchester Guardian, so of course it's lefty, because that's what, welcome to Manchester, essentially.
But it's but the UK Guardian is more on, the liberal end of things, trying to find, championing the best ideas will rise up, that stuff. Not taking into account the fact that terrible ideas rise up all the time.
Yep.
And sometimes win, as we can see in the world today now, especially in the Americas. But I think that, from reading that, the US Guardian is more along the democratic socialist upswing that you're getting in the Democratic Party now. You've got more socialist candidates standing and stuff, and I think that's where the left has moved to in America in a big way, whereas the UK Guardian is sticking to, I guess it's sort of almost veering into the term classical liberalism, maybe.
Yes, yeah, where it's like, oh, well, no, we can't, we can't possibly suppress free speech. And then the person who's getting the free speech is like, I think we should take all of these people off to camps and burn them. And it's like, well, and then the leftists are responding by saying, well, no, I will stop you from doing that. And then the centrist liberals are the ones saying, well, I don't know which one of these two is worse. And it's like, fuck off. Sometimes having integrity and telling the truth does require taking a stand. Weirdly enough.
Sometimes ideas are bad.
Sometimes ideas are bad, yes.
And don't give platforms to bad ideas.
Yeah, crazy.
Like that, it seems like, I mean, I've never been the editor of a major newspaper, but, I think that would be something that I would probably get tattooed to the inside of my eyelids, just to remind me.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so glad I'm not the editor of a newspaper.
Inner eyelid tattoos are expensive, I'm told. But I think that's quite enough terrible news for now. So I think we should move on. How about you?
Yeah, let's gender pop culture disorder ourselves. Okay, starting off. New documentary going to come out, I think, at the end of next year called Trans in Trumpland. It's obviously a documentary covering all of this nonsense and horrible, horrible bullshit that is happening to the trans community at the hands of the Trump administration. The project is being led by director Tony Zosha A. Feitan. Sorry, Tony, if I'm mispronouncing that. I am a moron. There's going to be a Kickstarter campaign launching at the end of the month, so get your pennies out. You can get more information on the upcoming Kickstarter and everything else to do with the movie at transintrumpland.com. So yeah, check that out. Don't know that much about it, but, any documentary that is fighting the good fight is okay in my book.
Yes.
Next up, moving right along, GLAAD, the American film and TV representation charity, have done their yearly Where We Are on TV report, and good news, LGBT representation is at an all-time high in American TV.
Woo!
Compared to British representation, they are well ahead of us in so many ways on trans stuff in general, but in certain parts of America, and so desperately behind us in other parts. But in the television media, there seems to be an upsurge. 8.8% of all featured characters on American-made TV shows on major networks, cable, and everything else are LGBT. That's 75 out of 859 series regulars.
Mm-hmm.
This is up by a full third compared to last year.
Nice.
Trans representation specifically on American TV has doubled since last year to 26 characters, almost entirely because of Pose and Supergirl.
Mm-mm.
Like, literally, almost entirely, those two shows.
Excellent.
Obviously, this beats British TV, which has, two people from soap operas, and what I'll be talking about next, from Butterfly. But of that 26, trans women make up
right
3/4 of that number. There's only 4 non-binary people and slightly more trans men, which, it's positive news across the board, but there is definite room for growth.
Oh, yeah. Okay, but still, the fact that it's happening at all in this direction is good, and obviously we've spoken about Pose and Supergirl, haven't we? So, it's, just briefly, when it comes to Pose...
just in passing.
Just in passing, here and there, But, that it is still progress, right? It's progress. Trans women are dominating it, but that is still progress. Maybe we'll get to a point next year where it's a much more even split with trans and non-binary. So, what else is there?
Butterfly wrapped itself up basically like a week ago as we record this. I'm going to assume that most people have seen it, so I'm going to get a little bit spoilery. If you haven't, use that skip button and stop skipping when we start talking about Sabrina, the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina.
Ooh.
But yeah, Butterfly, for people that don't necessarily know, 3-part ITV drama about the challenges that come with having a transgender child. Produced and starring Anna Friel as Vicky, the mother. Also stars Emma J. Scanlon as Stephen, the father, and Callum Booth Ford as Maxine, previously Max, transitioning, coming out, 11-year-old trans girl. The last episode, there were many times during the episode where I was thinking they have got too many balls in the air. Like, they have a whole thing with
I see.
Like, basically, Vicky sort of screws over her friend and her mum by taking money that she borrowed off her mum to use for a business and flying Maxine to Boston to try and get some kind of treatment because Maxine was being denied treatment by the gatekeepers at the child's...
NHS.
Yeah, on the NHS, basically. And that causes a whole heap of shit to just fall on this family. Like the father, Stephen. And this is a testament to how good an actor Emmett J. Scanlon is, because he goes to the police and it all just goes wrong. And on paper, Stephen is a nightmare. Like, at one point, he has hit Maxine. At various points, he's left the family a couple of times, reporting his wife to the police for child endangerment and kidnapping.
Jesus.
And stuff like that. It is a testament to the actor playing him that I only wanted to punch him in the face and not stab him to death. Because he actually brings, like, you understand his motivations. And that's a good thing about the show. You understand everyone's motivations. And you can see from your own life, like as a trans person watching it, you can see sort of correlations between, like, experiences you've had with friends and stuff. And yeah, it has a lot of balls in the air. And there was a point of 10 minutes until the end. I was just like, how are they going to wrap this up? But they do.
Impressive.
Like, they just... Yeah, they do it. Like, there was a lot going on. And, yeah, some storylines suffered. Like, there was a whole sort of subplot with Lily Duffy, played by Millie Gibson, Maxine's sister. Like, she's going out with a boy. I don't really know what happened there. They sort of let that one sort of wither and die.
I see.
They could have had another couple of episodes out of this easily. I mean, it was tight. It was very tight. Changing tensions all the time kept you on your toes. And I can only imagine what this did for any... parents of trans kids or trans kids themselves who were watching it. It must have been incredibly validating. I know it was validating for me in a lot of ways, but yeah, this could have easily been an 8-part thing. Like, there's so much scope for a season 2, and I really hope there is one. It's great. It's better than it had any right to be, and if you haven't seen it, I think you should go see it immediately. And if you have seen it, let us know what you think on the Twitter at whatthetrans. Yeah. Let us know if I'm completely full of shit.
Well, I mean, you know, maybe don't phrase it precisely like that, because that's getting close to sort of being a bit abusive. Anyway, cool, excellent. I'm glad that one turned out so well, you know, because I think we were worried about it before it went out, weren't we? About, like, you know, is it going to follow a load of tropes? But then we also knew that Mermaids, the charity, had helped out in the production of it, so at least, you know, it seemed like it would be quite well informed. And yeah, it's turned out great, as you say, better than it has any right to be. What's the next thing?
Okay, the last thing we're going to be talking about the chilling adventures of Sabrina. Mostly about the depiction of a non-binary character in the show. So to briefly summarize, like last time I tried to talk about this show, it took about 5 minutes for me to summarize it. So I'm going to try and do it in one sentence. The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is based off a spin-off comic that was based off an original comic, which is more like, we've all probably know what Sabrina the Teenage Witch is. If you don't, you can look it up. It's sort of a kids show that was around in the 90s. This is sort of a dark take on that. So it's got all of the same characters. You've got Sabrina Spellman, played by Kiernan Shipka. You've got Hilda Spellman, played by Lucy Davis. Miranda Otto playing Zelda Spellman. So they're the three. Salem the cat comes back, but he is a very, very different cat.
Aww.
He doesn't speak.
Aww.
Literal goblin.
Oh.
He's like a goblin who turns into a cat. It's like, I think in the show, wasn't it that Salem was turned into a cat by an evil witch or something?
Well, I thought he was an evil wizard and was turned into a cat as a punishment. Maybe. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah. In this, it's basically every witch gets a familiar. It's like a weird goblin coming from, or a demon that comes from some kind of alternative dimension or something. I don't know. But the cat, it's a delightfully camp, but very creepy sort of horror melodrama thing.
I see.
It's quite over the top. And there's a lot more conflict. Like, because, you know, in the show that I grew up with, you know, Zelda was the more, like, strict and stuff, but then also loving. And Hilda was sort of more loose and, you know, like, it was basically like a Monica from Friends and Phoebe from Friends.
Yeah.
Sort of the aunts of Sabrina. Whereas in this, Lucy Davis plays Hilda like just this loving, awesome aunt with a very dark streak. Like, you know, a lot of the characters in this say, like, Hail Satan. Like, they just openly worship Satan, which is a very different thing. Whereas Zelda in this, Miranda Waters' Zelda, is an authoritarian nightmare.
Right.
Who is still caring, but is incredibly militant in her religion. And it's sort of portrayed the witchcraft stuff portrayed as a religion. So you got all this stuff going on with goblins and demons and sacrifices and bleeding trees. Actually, I don't know if there's bleeding trees in it. There's just lots of messed up imagery like that. And, you know, the ghosts of dead children. Just, it's a whole thing. But the thing that we want to talk about is the non-binary character, obviously. This is Sabrina's friend Susie, played by Lachlan Watson. And I've seen the first 5 episodes at the time of recording. I would have watched a whole lot, but I'm currently seeing my folks in North Yorkshire, as I said before. And the internet's not that great here. So Susie is Sabrina's friend, and Susie... And in the 5 episodes I have seen, there's been no mention of a non-binary identity there.
I see.
And I was thinking that maybe, like, it's reminded me of certain erasure of bisexual people in certain shows. Because I remember when I first discovered what bisexual erasure was, I was watching *Halt and Catch Fire*, right? And there's a character in that, Joe McMillan. Can't remember who plays him, but he is so hot. I desperately want to go to town on him. But anyway, also, hi Mum, I know you're listening. But yeah, in that, he was a bisexual character, but nobody ever said the B word.
Right.
And I mistook that for good writing.
I see.
Like, you know, less is said, that kind of thing. But then my flatmate turned to me and was like, no, that's bisexual erasure, that's a thing. I was like, oh, shit.
Yeah, afraid so. Sorry.
Yeah, and I had no idea. And it reminded me of that, because just like, oh, this is a person they're going to say is non-binary in interviews and stuff, but then in the show, like, people would just assume that Susie is, like, just a butch lesbian type, or, like, a tomboy lesbian type. And the storyline with Susie is quite hardcore. Like, in the first episode, they are suffering a lot of violence at school. Like, in the first episode, they get beaten up by guys sort of wanting to expose their breasts and stuff and see if they're, quote-unquote, a real girl or whatever. And they sort of form a society to, you know, deal with women's issues. And this is the thing. Like, in most of the show, they refer to Susie as a she and a her.
I see.
And they put her in a club called WICA, or the Women's Intersectional Cultural and Creative Association.
Sorry, that's excellent.
Yeah, it's an excellent thing, but then, like, they made a big stink about this non-binary character in it, but then they're basically coding them as female in this. But, after some digging online, Lachlan on their Tumblr, after being asked by a fan, what's the deal with the pronoun situation, they said, Susie is female on the show for now. So yes, they are referred to as she, her, but I try to use they, them whenever I speak about Susie, because I believe she, her would make Susie a tad uncomfy. But their pronouns will be changing very soon. But as far as the general is concerned, Susie is still female. So I don't know if that means that by the end of the series, there's going to be a coming out story, or at some point in the next season, maybe, there will be a non-binary coming out story, which I don't think I've ever seen on TV. That may be a first. I don't know. Maybe some of our, teleaddict non-binary fans out there will be able to let us know on the Twitter and stuff. And also the makers of the show sort of talked with Lachlan about their experiences and stuff and all of that. And it's like their experiences inform the characters. So I was a little hesitant, but then, it sounds like they know what they're doing. Like, it's going to be an evolving storyline. So yeah, I'd say watch the show if that's your kind of thing. It's in the same universe as Riverdale, that's also on Netflix. So you know what you're getting. High camp teen melodrama. It's got some very funny moments in it, and it's just quite silly, but also quite cool. And Richard Cole's in it, playing not the devil, but pretty close, and he's very camp and fun. So yeah, check it out.
Fun. So that's our gender pop culture disorder for the bye week. Yes.
Yeah. Oh my god, I'm exhausted after that.
Yeah,
that was a lot of news.
That was a bunch of stuff, wasn't it? So
it's been big. It's been a big news week. Like it's there's been all that Trump stuff, all the Brazil stuff, and the TV stuff as well. Like, because
Yeah,
I'm guessing with the TV stuff, there's a lot of new shows coming out because it's about that time of year where a lot of networks are putting the network season sort of starting up as well. Like, yeah, it's. Whew.
Yeah, there's been a lot going on. I think the fact that there's been a lot going on recently has kind of informed our choice of the hot take this particular bye-week, because we wanted to highlight something which, although it didn't happen particularly recently, is something that has a couple of lessons in it, perhaps. So this is something that we've actually mentioned in brief before, but we've not really gone into depth about because it's history, and this really is a current affairs and bitching podcast. So you might have noticed a lot of people who oppose trans rights use the whole canard of, oh, it's a new fad, it's caused by Tumblr or comic books or video games or whatever else. This idea that being trans is a new thing, or that it's in some way a social contagion, is one that's repeated often because I think a lot of people want to believe it. They want to be able to dismiss all of our experiences as invalid in some way. But as we know, it's not a new thing. Trans people have always existed and have at different times and in different places been accorded wildly varying degrees of treatment. But in the early 20th century, as a more scientific, evidence-based way of looking at the world was entering the mainstream consciousness, efforts were made in a number of countries to understand gay and gender non-conforming people and to say that such people existed, are part of this world, and shouldn't be denied or treated poorly simply because of who they are. So in Europe, one of the leading proponents of this view was German physician Magnus Hirschfeld, a name to conjure with. I suggest you look him up. Who in the late...
That is the most German name I've heard in a long time.
It's very German, isn't it? Magnus Hirschfeld. It's pretty good. He wasn't an absolute saint / savior. I don't think anybody was back then, but he did a lot of stuff. And well, anyway, so in the late 19th century, Hirschfeld had actually been involved in campaigning to change or remove the 1871 legislation that criminalized homosexuality. And in July 1919, Hirschfeld and others opened the Institute for Sexualwissenschaft in a villa not far from the Reichstag in Berlin, taking advantage of the newly liberal Weimar Republic of Germany. And because of the complex relationship between the Reich and the local governments, the 1871 law actually remained on the books, but the Prussian police had been given orders not to enforce it, which turned Prussia and particularly Berlin into a haven for the LGBT community of the time. The library at the Institute housed Hirschfeld's huge archive on sexuality, which over the years was added to with additional case studies, diaries, and even some art and poetry. The Institute also housed the Museum of Sex, an educational resource for the public which was reportedly visited by school children. Hirschfeld himself actually lived within the institution's grounds on the second floor with his partner Karl Geiss, and the two were a well-known couple in Berlin's gay scene. People from all over Europe would visit the institute to better understand their sexuality or their gender identity, including British writer Christopher Isherwood, who wrote about his visit alongside poet W.H. Auden in the book Christopher and His Kind.
So hang on, hold up. So there's this there's a gay couple that live in a sex museum and research trans stuff and LGBT stuff.
In Berlin in the 1920s and the early part of the 1930s, yes, that was a thing.
That is not what I at all expected to learn about today. That is incredible.
Yeah, and it is something that I think should be kind of a little bit more widely known. Obviously, it's well known in sort of some circles and trans history nerds and stuff, because those people do exist. Hello. But it was astonishing to me to find out that this place existed, and obviously the story of what happened to it was sort of, it's sort of poignant and whatever else. But yes, that's the point, is so that Magnus Hirschfeld was calling for, an open and liberalized approach to homosexuality and transgender people by saying these people are just part of this, we're here, we exist, and, let us just get on with it. In 1896, he was writing this in a pamphlet, although, admittedly, he wrote that particular pamphlet under a pseudonym. But it was he that wrote it, railing against the 1871 legislation, paragraph 175 of the Prussian Penal Code, I think. But in addition to, being a gay man himself and doing a tremendous amount of study on that particular issue, he particularly noticed as well in the 1910s and 20s, how gay men had a higher rate of suicide. And that comes down to the minority stress thing that we had mentioned on a couple of previous occasions, where people are so stressed
I
about...
can imagine, like, at that point,
at the
that
time,
was basically minority stress on steroids.
yeah, absolutely. And
you
so,
get caught kissing. If you're a guy who gets caught kissing a guy in public, then you're probably going to end up homeless within the same 24-hour space.
yeah, precisely. It was not a good time overall. But then there was this one sort of small enclave in Germany where the laws were not really being enforced. So there was a tremendous artistic and cultural scene in Weimar, Germany. And so Hirschfeld at the Institute also met with trans woman Lily Elbe, the Danish artist who is, of course, the subject of the film The Danish Girl. Now, say what you like about the film, but Lily Elbe was a real person. And in 1910, Hirschfeld had actually coined the term transvestite to describe today what would be called trans people today. And the Institute became a haven for trans folks, where Hirschfeld offered them shelter from abuse, performed some surgeries, and gave otherwise unemployable transgender people jobs. Well, employment usually of a kind of a menial type, really, mostly as maids, as it were. But the personal stories of these people, again, ended up in Hirschfeld's library. So, unfortunately...
That's, again, incredible. That's...
Yeah, it was... So it was...
Like, there's this building that existed that was just full of trans people and gay people and stuff, just doing work, helping out the community in, like... Weimar Republic, Germany?
Yeah, exactly. And so they had a whole medical staff.
Is it Weimar or Weimar?
I am not entirely sure, actually. But they had a whole medical staff to this. So there were a couple of psychologists, another couple of physicians, and a specialist endocrinologist. And they were prescribing things like hormone replacement therapy for trans men and women, and developed some of the first surgical techniques, to alleviate certain things, shall we say. But there was a whole kind of treatment program here, as it were. You could think of it as a gender clinic, essentially, because that's where a lot of people, they travelled into Berlin to be able to meet Hirschfeld and be treated by him. So
we're talking the upper crust,
there was definitely a case of affordability to it, but then also within Berlin's cultural scene, there was obviously there's the kind of subculture, people who move to Berlin specifically to kind of get treatment, and end up working in Berlin's club and drag scene sort of thing. So, I think that was something that was mentioned when we were speaking to Morgan M. Page. Do you remember? There was actually quite a vibrant scene in that part of Germany. Simply because of the kind of liberal permissiveness of the time.
Yeah.
And a lot of these, a lot of people actually gravitated towards Berlin for that reason. So a lot of people who are, would today be called trans women or trans men. But unfortunately, I think a lot of people who might be listening to this story can, by this point, start to see how it ends. In the early 1930s, Germany was changing. In 1932, the police once again started enforcing the 1871 legislation to crack down on the LGBT community, and although the institute did stay open, the authorities began to harass the people who were associated with it. A few months after Hitler rose to power, on May the 6th, 1933, a group of university students belonging to the National Socialist Student League stormed into the institution shouting "Brenn Hirschfeld," which is "Burn Hirschfeld," and began to beat up the staff.
Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. They beat up the staff and they smashed the premises. Later the same day, the SA arrived to remove all of the volumes from the library, which were to be burned at an event 4 days later. So this was carried out on May the 10th, and actually one of the most famous images from any Nazi book burning was taken there as the library of the Institute burned. Around 20,000 books and journals and about 5,000 images were destroyed. Hirschfeld himself was...
when you were at uni and you met, a bunch of, students from a political society?
Yes.
And I don't want to speak too well of, political students, but there are certain groups at universities where you're just I never want to be in the same room as you again, or get into any kind of conversation with you because you're making my brain fall to bits through sheer boredom/rage, which is a very strange feeling to be bored and angry at the same time. I imagine that is this group of students. They're the kind of people who you'll be sitting in a bar and you'll make a stupid joke and then they'll turn around to you and be like, "Oh, do you want to talk about the Russian Revolution?" And you're like,
yeah.
No, I don't.
I mean, this lot were definitely not the
Russian Revolution type. So the National Socialist Student League. This wasn't. So when they say
student Nazis,
basically, the guys who legit believed in it and decided off their own recognizance to go and duff up some people, some gays, some people they didn't like.
I can't think of worse people. Like, Nazis as a rule are awful, but student Nazis.
I know, right? They think
the arrogance of youth and all of that. Oh my God.
I know. But the point is, I'll just finish this bit up and then we can whinge about it some more. But so at the time this happened, Hirschfeld himself wasn't actually in Germany and never returned there. He died in France in 1935 after trying in vain to restart the institute in Paris. Other staff members there weren't so lucky. Unfortunately, in March 1933, the main administrator for the clinic, a Kurt Hiller, was sent to a concentration camp. Karl Geiss, Hirschfeld's partner, committed suicide after the Nazi invasion of Czechoslovakia. The institute and its list of staff and patients with addresses were used by the Nazis to identify gay men for persecution and deportation, which started in 1934. So, if anybody tries to tell you that being trans is new or a fad or didn't exist in my day, then they can just fuck right off. Because we had a history. It was meticulously kept, it was regularly updated, and it went up in smoke because of the Nazis. Most of what was lost in the burning of that library is obviously irreplaceable. They've done it before and they would do it again with half a chance, so let's not give them the chance. So, yes, that's my hot take. How did I do?
That's all right. I mean, it's very relevant.
And the rhetoric against it is the same. It's precisely the same argument, sort of talking points about people being degenerates and, one of the things that sort of the frequent justifications of the Trump administration for its anti-trans things is, we're doing it for national security. It's to protect people, and that's precisely the same justifications that were being given as, this is for national security. This is to protect the Reich.
And yeah, Trump said that exact thing. I mean, he was asked about just like, we're looking to protect everybody. When asked about, legislating trans people out of existence, and I was astonished. Just because, that was only a amount of degrees away from saying the trans people are enemies of the people or a danger.
It's not far off at all, and that's the idea of it. It's a dog whistle, and who knows how long it'll be before it becomes that open. It might not be long at all, and Trump is literally saying all trans people are enemies of the US. It doesn't seem particularly beyond the realms of possibility, and that in itself is real scary.
There are some people who want to argue, because I just saw, the most preposterous hot take in Spiked when looking up stories for this. Spiked is one of the, we use a service that, aggregates all of the news and stuff, and we look through that, as well as other sources. But, yeah, primarily we use this one source that, sort of scrapes all of the news places for stories that we can talk about. And unfortunately, Breitbart and Spiked get caught up in this kind of thing. And Spiked, for people who don't know, is, in their words, a libertarian news website that primarily defends Nazis and under the guise of free speech. They never seem to defend anybody else as free speech. They just defend Nazis. Which I guess that's a hill you can die on. But yeah, this one hot take, I can't remember the journalist and who did it, and I don't really want to, and, fuck them. But he was like, no, Trump isn't erasing trans people because trans people could still exist. They're just not going to have any laws mentioning it.
It's not going to have any rights.
Yeah, and that's a hell of a take. And that is probably, that's that kind of thinking that ends in this. It ends in the Nazis. This is thing, I only discovered this little thing a few weeks ago. I think I talked about it on the last episode, or maybe the episode before, where to people like Trump and the people on the far right and people who think that trans people are degenerates, there is no middle ground. For them to become friends with us, they would just have to be like, oh yeah, trans people are fine, and then we'd leave them alone forever. But reverse that, we would have to die to be okay with them, for them to be okay with us. There is no middle ground. That's where it has to go, because when you've got trans people running around and you think that they are a danger, what can you do? You can legislate them out of existence. Basically, essentially make it so that it's impossible for them to go out into public and live a life. But then trans people will still try to live a public life and trying to be places. So they ghetto them. They put these people in a ghetto, away from the people. But then again, trans people will find a way out. Trans people will go out into the world or, try and escape. So then they try and move them away. You'd move the trans people away into somewhere else. But then they're still around and you still got to look after them and stuff. So then you see where this is going. This is how genocides start, right here. And people will think I'm being histrionic and stuff. No, look at history. This is like what happened right here in Germany in the 30s. That's what happened. It started off because we're living through. Some will believe that we're living through a very, very liberal time where people can be openly LGBT in many parts of the world, and you can see how fast that swings back.
Worrying, isn't it? So,
it's quite a concern, and I think that in today, if trans people aren't involved with their local Antifa activities, they should start.
Let's get to the invective. Let's get to the point where we just rail against people and call them dickheads. So who's our dickhead this week?
Well, it's amazing that he hasn't been before, to be honest with you, and it's not entirely surprising. Donald Trump is our dickhead.
Oh,
to
yeah.
the point where dickhead doesn't
guy,
describe it. We might have to change the segment's name just because it doesn't do him justice.
It's kind of gone beyond that. It's, it definitely involves some sort of use of the word colossal, perhaps. I don't know, we'll think of something. But basically, Jesus, he's opened the door to this fascism. And, absolutely willingly and complicitly, I just wonder to what extent if he understands it.
Yeah, do you remember, when he first got in? In the first couple of months, people were genuinely having the conversation, is he a knowing fascist, or is he just a moron? Is this some kind of coup, or is he just a bumbling idiot? And I guess it doesn't really matter because the end result is the same. But it's incredible, and now again, doesn't matter. He's been going after Muslims from the start. He opened his campaign by going after Mexicans. He's basically going after. He's pointing at people and saying these people are a problem. And that doesn't end well. That never, ever ends well.
So it certainly does not. But I think that leads very, very nicely into our heroes this week, who are, it's the American trans community and its resilience and solidarity and huge flags, who, in response to Trump and his retrograde rhetoric, are just like, nope, not here. And being seen, being heard, organizing, and I am amazed, honestly. Yes, it's been hard that, as we mentioned, the calls to the Trans Lifeline suicide hotline have increased, but people are staffing that line. People are there for each other. There are, even now, as you say, people organizing together to fight against Trump in the courts. And that resilience and compassion for each other is what's going to see us through, I believe. And so, you guys, absolute heroes. All the respect. I'm not sure I could cope were the situation reversed. So,
getting the strength and the bravery to just confront Jeff Sessions, because I think
I know
when people see that, they don't know how hard that is. The closest I got, and this is a particularly embarrassing story, but screw it. When I was 18, I kissed William Hague.
Ew.
He was doing a book signing across the road from a shop I worked in, and I had a camcorder with me, because an old school camcorder that was, the size of my head.
On tape and everything, yeah.
Yeah, it's on tape. I still got the tape somewhere. But my friend who I was working with was like, look, you owe me a favour. You owe me some money. If you go across the road and kiss William Hague's head, I will let you off. And back then, a tenner was all the money in the world. So I went across the road. to
Yeah.
Monica's bookshop, now Waterstones in Northallerton High Street.
Okay, look, I do see where you're going with this, but I think the relevance is quite limited. I think kissing William Hague's head is not the same as in.
It took a lot of
It's
my
not the
strength,
same
'cause
as.
I was freaking out all the way in the queue. I ended up buying his book, and I asked him. I didn't just assault him. I asked him, "Can I kiss your head?" And he was like, "What?" And I was like, "Please, there's a camera.
Michelle.
Let's do it." And and that took bravery. I would like to think that
Okay.
puts me in exactly the same place as this trans guy who confronted Jeff Sessions, because that took bravery. I completely understand how brave you have to be to do that. So you, sir, are a goddamn hero.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you are, Michelle, but let's have that discussion after we've finished recording. It
was really smooth and shiny.
Yeah, no, good, excellent.
It was wrong. I don't know what was wrong with me. You do strange things when you're in the closet. You do really odd things. He wasn't the first guy I kissed, though. The first guy I kissed turned out to be a paedophile.
And that's all we've got time for on What's the Trans this bi-week. Thanks to my co-presenter Michelle, who from now on will be following a strict policy of silence as we record.
You can't silence me.
I can try.
Where's my Guardian column?
About you being silenced. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, seriously, that is all the time we've got for. Thank you, Michelle, for that extremely productive and useful contribution to the discussion. And we shall return in 2 weeks' time. Please stay safe, look after each other, and solidarity. Bye-bye!
And don't kiss conservatives.
Don't ever kiss conservatives.